Thank you for tuning into our podcast, Canal Days, What Life Was Like in the Industrial Connecticut River Valley of Massachusetts. I am your host, Carrie, and joining us today is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Cumming. He personally offers and leads public and private tours, as well as presentations of historical sites within communities throughout the state of Massachusetts. Currently, the communities that he has chosen to focus on this year are Holyoke, Chicopee, South Hadley, and East Hampton, and also Granby and Amherst as well. His tours spotlight on the local canals, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks, streets, and selected historical houses within each community. And in today's episode, we'll be discussing the churches of Holyoke, Protestants. So, describe the Protestant churches of Holyoke.
All right, like you know, Holyoke has the Christians, which broke into the Catholics and Protestants, and has the Jewish people. And we'll have a series to talk about all these three groups. But today, we're going to talk about the Protestant churches. And, well, there's so many branches, but generally we'll talk about where they're located within Holyoke. And we're also going to talk about, after churches are gone, what might have happened to them, and what the future might be like, specific to Holyoke. Now, there's a nice book by a person named Underwood. He wrote a book called The Catholics and Protestant, and he wrote it about Holyoke. And so you can read about these interrelationships between the churches, but we're really concerned about the physical properties of the churches. So I'll give you a breakdown of some of the churches. For instance, the First Baptist Church was probably the first particular church in Holyoke itself. And nowadays it's located at the corner of South Street and Northampton Street. It's still there. That's not the absolute first church. The first church before that, the First Baptist Church, had a wooden church in two different locations. One at the Kmart Plaza area and one at the Metcalf School area. And those two existed a long time ago. The one that's there now, the First Baptist Church, I think is from the 1880s. And the Second Baptist Church also has traveled around. Its first location is in back of the Richardsonian train station. That was from about the 1870s up to about the late 1890s. And believe it or not, after that shorter span, they took it down, and the Second Baptist Church then moved up to Appleton Street, where it still exists as a building. Now, if you can talk about the congregations now, they've moved around quite a bit. They were actually in the wooden-clad Baptist church for a while. Then they moved out on their own. They moved up to a wooden building. That was where the Lynch School was, where the bottom of Anniversary Field is. And then even that, when they finally wanted a brick-and-mortar church, that moved to Pleasant Street and Hamden Street. It's still there. It's from 1884, I believe, and it has a chapel embedded into it along its side. So if you hear the first congregations, you must have a second congregation somewhere. Yes, they need the one downtown, and in 1850, they built one right across from where City Hall came into existence, across Wright Street. It's now been moved out of there. Just 36 years later, they moved from there, took that down, and in 1886, they built one on Maple Street with a Skinner Chapel along its side. It's a gorgeous complex. The church itself is in the Romanesque and Gothic style, and that's because of fire somewhat damaged some of the building. So to fix it up, they added two styles together, and it works. It looks very unique for that reason. All right, and then you can talk about the Episcopal Church, and that started in a location where the modern-day Hadley Falls Trust Company Bank is on Maple Street. But they moved out of there, and they moved up to a location just short of Holy Cross Church on Appleton Street, and there they have a gorgeous church with a rectory alongside of it. And then you can talk about the Presbyterians, and they are right across from the Holyoke Library, and they have a nice building there. It still exists. And then you can talk about the Lutherans. The Lutherans had two buildings. One was in South Holyoke, at the very tip of Hamilton Park, and the other one was on Sargent Street at the corner of Elm. And they were different because one was based on the principles of Luther, the other one was based on the principles of Calvin. So a lot of Protestant churches around. Now, what else do you have around? You have the Methodist Episcopal Church, and that had three churches. One was on Main Street at the corner of Appleton, but that's long gone because they ended up moving up to a part of Appleton Street, very close alongside Chestnut Street. In that building, was their main location. But even that wasn't enough for them because they started getting a lot of parishioners up in the Highlands, so they started the Highland Methodist Episcopal Church, and that's still there. It's a person's house now. It's a wooden-clad building right along Kennedy Park. And even that building became later the Christian Science Building. And so you see a lot of denominations, a lot of buildings moving around. And I'm just talking about the Protestants still. You can imagine that the Catholics are like, they moved around too. And there nowadays are small street corner churches. We won't talk about those because those move at a great rate. They're not really aligned with any particular group. So I hope you understand some of this. On my website, I have a description of every one of these.
And where are these churches located?
Okay, they're located in places where the people are. And so that's why they tended to move around a lot. The ones, for instance, the Second Baptist Church, there used to be a lot of people in the flats. But as more and more people moved higher and higher up, they moved their operations up to the middle part of Appleton Street. And that is a general principle. They start low because the population of Holyoke's midsection was down low, a lot of people in the flats in South Holyoke. And then with the ages, they move up to the downtown Churchill area. And then they move up to the Highlands and into the Oakdale, Elmwood areas. And so you'd have these churches moving along a great route. Almost everyone had them moving uptown. The only time that didn't really happen was with the First Baptist Church. That stayed uptown on Northampton Street. Now, this occurs even to move out of the communities, like the Presbyterians, for about 100 years, were next to the library. And then they moved off to Granby. And then the Second Baptist Church, before they sold to an evangelical group, they were on Appleton Street. Then they moved out to South Hadley. All right, so a lot of these churches moved onwards.
And really quick before we continue with the rest of our interview, just to fill our listeners in, if you want to sign up for any of his various tours or check out more information, check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org. And there you can also find videos and podcasts of the stops along each of his tours, and as well as photos and text of the historical sites as well. And for private tours and other inquiries, you can email him directly at bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. And his tours make for fun, educational, outdoor activities for families and group parties. So getting back to our interview, what has happened to these churches?
Okay, a lot of them still exist, and that's great because a lot of them are quite gorgeous. Now, some don't exist. Well, what happens is if you can't find another owner, they start to deteriorate. There's no one around to start to fix things up. Like the Methodist Episcopal Church is totally gone. Hardly anyone remembers what it looks like. There's other churches I haven't mentioned yet called, for instance, the Unity Church used to exist, a Unitarian denomination. That was very gorgeous, a very round structure, and that too is gone. And a lot of them do exist too, and I hope they stay that way. Like, for instance, the Presbyterian Church is gorgeous. It has a very unique Richardsonian look to it, and I hope it stays there. The St. Paul's Episcopal Church is also gorgeous, even though it's 120 years or more that's been this location. It's still there, and it's still very functional. So you have a mixed bag. You have that movement away from downtown, and a lot of those original churches are gone, and that's sad. So you can't see the absolute oldest churches, but you do see a lot of churches from the 1880s, 1890s that are still around, and they're kept in fairly decent shape in most cases.
And what will their future be like?
All right, the future of the Protestant churches in Holyoke probably will be bright because a lot of them have congregations still inside of them, and that's key because they can see what needs to be fixed. The worst thing that can happen is they get abandoned. Now, that's not always true. The Second Baptist Church had to close up about 10 years ago because a couple parts of the steeple fell in, and so they were closed up by the city. And so, again, you have somewhat a mixed bag, but in most cases, a lot of these buildings are in great shape. For instance, the Highlands Methodist Episcopal Church, now a home, is in superb shape. Just needs a little bit of work. But if you have someone there, then that's a sign that they're going to be kept going. Now, even though there was a move upwards and then a move outwards to surrounding communities, the buildings that are left are still occupied, and I hope they still stay that way and still are functional. For instance, that Presbyterian church is now an evangelical church, and it's still in pretty decent shape outside and inside.
And thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours and historical topics of your expertise. And of course, we want to thank our listeners for tuning in. And you can check out more of his podcasts on his website as well as on SoundCloud.com. And be sure to stay up to date with new podcasts and videos posted daily. Thank you and hope you join us again. Thank you for tuning into our podcast, Canal Days, What Life is Like in the Industrial Connecticut River Valley of Massachusetts. I am your host, Carrie, and joining us today is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Coma. He offers and leads public and private tours, as well as presentations of historical sites within communities throughout the state of Massachusetts. Currently, the communities that he has chosen to focus on this year are Holyoke, Chicopee, South Hadley, and East Hampton, and also Granby and Amherst as well. His tours spotlight on local canals, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks, streets, and selected historical houses within each community. And in today's episode, we will be discussing the Churches of Holyoke, Catholics. So describe the Catholic Churches of Holyoke.
All right, to describe them, and which of them had like schools and convents and rectories, and what has happened to them in the future? Have they moved around and been taken down? And this means that we start with the first, and that is very easily the St. Jerome's Church, which is next to what was called Hampton Park, now it's called Veterans Park. And that was the first one of all, and it served all ethnic groups no matter what, and it covered all the area to the north up to Greenfield because there was no other church up there. And so for a few years, you'd have many people up north come down to St. Jerome's. And it was great because it had a full campus, and it always was called the most complete campus in western and central Massachusetts. And that's true because it had a hospital, had old age homes, and orphanages were further away. But it had a lot going for it. But then you get the Sacred Heart Church, 1876, and they were put up in the Churchill neighborhood with nothing else around, and the neighborhood grew around it. And then you go onwards and upwards to the French Canadians wanted their own church, and by 1870 they got one. They went down from Exchange Hall for 1 year. They went downwards to South Holyoke and had a wooden church there in 1876, so they were ready to inhabit the basement, and then it grew. Of course, they had a great tragedy, 1875, where 70 people lost their lives due to a fire in the wooden-clad church. All right, and then onwards the Rosary Church from 1886, which was an Irish denomination church, and onwards 1890, the Perpetual Hope Church, which at first was along the Connecticut River, right on the edge of what is now Pulaski Park. And then onwards, the Mother de Rosa Church started without a church, but as a parish in search of a church, and they were in the basement of the Rosary Church in 1896. By 1901 and 2, they got their own church. And then 1902, the Holy Cross Church came around, an Irish denomination church. And then about 1912, the Blessed Sacrament started up. First year was in the Metcalf School. Then they got their own school church, one building. In the 1950s, they got a separate one of those, a modern building. And we shouldn't leave out, there was a church at the Brightside neighborhood that served not only the orphans and toddlers, but it also served the people that were neighbors to them. And that was the Holy Name Church, a Holy Family Church, I'm sorry. All right, so these very, very many churches grew and grew. Now there's one more. There's the Immaculate Conception Church, started about 1902, and that was in the Flats neighborhood. That was a French denomination church, and that one grew a nice parish, or nice campus around it, and most of it's still there.
And where are these churches located?
Okay, St. Jerome's is on Hampden Street next to the Veterans Park. Sacred Heart is on Maple Street next to Sargent Street. Precious Blood was on Cabot Street, and even the wooden clad building was on Cabot Street. And Rosary was in the Flats, not there anymore. Immaculate Conception is in the Flats. It has a representative church there, but number 1 and 2 church are now gone. The Mother de Rosa is gone, but that was on Lyman Street. Holy Cross is there, and that's on the corners of Dwight and Appleton Street, and his mission church is still in place. Blessed Sacrament, all 3 representations of Blessed Sacrament are still in place. The one in Brightside is now gone, so that's pretty much it. And there hasn't been too much moving around. It's not like the Protestant neighborhood a lot.
And really quick, before we continue with the rest of our interview, just to fill our listeners in, if you want to find out more information or sign up for any of his various tours, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org. And there you can find videos and podcasts of the stops along each of his tours, as well as text and photos of the historical sites as well. And for private tours and other inquiries, you can email him directly at bobcat4214, And his tours make for fun educational outdoor activities for families and group parties. Getting back to our interview, which of these churches had schools?
All right, most of them did. And the big difference between the Catholic and Protestant churches is that a lot of the Catholic churches of New England had schools associated with them. Most of the Protestant didn't. Some did, but most of them depended upon them going to public schools and then have a Sunday school for regular religious education for those students. So a lot of the Catholic churches had schools with them. St. Jerome's, grammar school and high school associated with that church. The Sacred Heart, grammar school and high school associated with that church. The Precious Blood, boys and girls school and then high school associated with that church. The Immaculate Conception, which for a few years had a high school, but that was only 10 years, but it definitely had a grammar school. The Holy Rosary, a grammar school and a high school associated with that church. The Mother de Rosa, grammar school only. And Holy Cross never did. By that later date, they depended upon students taking a trolley down to like St. Jerome's. The Blessed Sacrament had primary school education, no high school. And then the Holy Name Church, or Holy Family Church of Brightside, had boys and girls grammar schools for all their orphanage students.
And what will be the future of these Catholic churches?
Okay, the future might be bright, but who knows? I missed one more school. The Perpetual Hopes also had a grammar school in both locations. It was by the river. Then it moved uptown to near Cabot Street. So the future for a lot of these places, well, some of them are totally gone now, and others are will be gone soon. So the Rosary is gone. The Immaculate Conception is it's unto a third church, and the school and convent are still there. So that might have some uses to it. It might be trying to sell at this point, but the rectory is heavily used. The precious blood is being used for the Sister of Providence and their various programs like the Broderick House and Kate's Kitchen. So that's a great program to go. The Blessed Sacrament and Mater Dei Rosa are still schools and churches in their own right. The Mater Dei Rosa had to combine with the Holy Cross to make Our Lady of the Cross. But the Blessed Sacrament has the full campus going. And Perpetual Help burned in the fire in 1998. And Sacred Heart might be coming down. They took out a permit to take it down in the year 2023, and this one might come down in the year 2024. So some of them might have a good future. They're now down to 3 churches that are totally active: St. Jerome's, Holy Cross, and Blessed Sacrament. Someday I bet that would be reduced to 2. Who knows which one would go? The 2 Holy Cross and the St. Jerome's are so nice and they're so old that I hate to see those 2 go. So the Blessed Sacrament might be changed over to like a Protestant church at some point. That's what I'm hoping. But who knows?
And thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours and your historical topics of your expertise. And of course, we want to thank our listeners for tuning in. And check out a large selection of our other podcasts at his website, as well as on SoundCloud.com. And be sure to stay up to date with new podcasts and videos posted daily. Thank you, and hope you join us again. We'll be discussing the Protestants and Catholics book by Kenneth Underwood in 1957. So this is a book review of Protestants and Catholics. Why was Holyoke selected as a backdrop for this book?
The writer could have selected any town or city in the United States. He just wanted the context, and he admits that in the preface in the first chapter or 2. And he selected Holyoke because he considered the Holyoke to be the most Catholic of all cities in the United States. Probably true. And the reason why that might be true is that so many of these immigrants come into this large industrial city were from Ireland, Quebec, and Poland, and they were all Catholics. And that made the tilt or the balance or percentage greater than 50% Catholic and under 50% for the Protestant, which is very unusual for the United States because the United States is a Protestant nation. It has many more Protestant institutions and people, and still does, and almost always did through its history. Massachusetts is the most Catholic of state, and Holyoke is the most Catholic of communities within there. So he chose Holyoke, and it was a good choice. Now, along the way, we're going to talk about the positives and then the negatives of this book, and do the values that the book wrote about still hold true. Kenneth Underwood was, I believe, a professor somewhere in Boston, and he wrote this in the late 1950s, and he wrote about the history, of course, of the religion and their values within Holyoke and how they changed. And he wanted to examine how people deal with such a topic in such a city.
And what are the positives of this book?
The positives are that it's a nicely written book. It explains itself very well at each turn. And it uses a nice backdrop that I can appreciate, Holyoke. And so I understood enough about the city and enough about religion within the city that I could figure out what he was talking about. I understood where all the churches were and who went there and the neighborhoods they served and the problems they might have had, and whether it was for the Catholics or the Protestants. And that helped me greatly to understand what he was writing about. And he wrote about through several decades, and I understand the history of Holyoke well enough to know that what he wrote about was true. Um, when Margaret Sanger came to Holyoke, he wrote about that very well and how she was greeted within the community. And the dynamics between the Catholics and the Protestants I never knew very well because I didn't know the antagonism was there. Of course, it must have been in a very high level of Catholics. There must have been antagonism, so he wrote about that very well, and that surprised me, and I didn't know a thing about it. I didn't know it existed at all, and so now I do know a great deal more about it.
To our interview, what are the negatives of this book?
He, Kenneth Underwood, used the term paper city whenever he should have been using the word Holyoke, and he did that on purpose. He said right in the first chapter what he's doing and why he's doing it for. He didn't want to have to single out the community of Holyoke as to being the one he was writing about. It has enough attention through the years. It had enough of problems that he just didn't want to single out. But everyone know who he's talking about. And, in the first half of the book, you don't mind when he says Paper City this or Paper City that. By the second half of the book, I was getting tired of that. I know so much about Holyoke. Why doesn't he just come out and say Holyoke and say its problems are this, its good things are this, so forth. That would have been less of an irritant to me. Now, also, I wish I heard from him more of the positives of the relationships between the Protestants and the Catholics. There were a lot of Protestants that got along just fine with the Catholics. Some people didn't care. You often just hear of antagonism in any explanation, and I wish I heard some of the positives, and even the positives within the denomination. So Catholics, whether they're French Canadian or Irish or Polish, got along better than you might have thought. And so I know to write a book you got to point out what's wrong, and he sure did that. But I wish I heard some of the good things.
And so, do the values in this book still hold true?
No. Remember, it's from 1957, and a lot of the history was talking about was from, say, 1880s up to 1957. And the United States, Massachusetts, and Holyoke has changed so dramatically in terms of religion in the last 70 plus years that I would say what he's talking about no longer holds true, so it's all historic. In fact, the opinion of the Catholics has changed, and it changes by the decades. You might be having a down period now, but 10 years from now, it might be having an up period. And the Protestants the same. Maybe they're going through a good period now, but who knows what they'll go through. And so, no, now within Holyoke, the dynamics of the people have changed so drastically that when you first say, "Oh, what's the most highest point of antagonism between any groups," you wouldn't say religion is very high. Maybe it'll make the bottom of top 10 list, but it wouldn't make the top 5 anymore. Whereas 100 years ago, maybe it would make the top 5. And nowadays, the points of antagonism might be along the line of ethnic values, and it might be along the line of how to get the economy better within Holyoke. And sure, they were high before, but those weren't at number 1 and 2 like they are now. So sure, values have changed, and I'm sure they'll change in another 50 years. That's the way it is.
So, thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours and historical topics of your expertise. And thank you to our sponsors. And of course, we want to thank our listeners for tuning in. And check out a large selection of other podcasts on his website, as well as on SoundCloud.com. And be sure to stay up to date with new podcasts and videos posted daily. Thank you, and hope you join us again.